All right, so buckle up because we're diving deep, way deeper than your average Dante Cliff Notes, into the world of Dante
The
Alighieri.
man behind the Divine Comedy, you got it.
Yeah, we're talking about his life in Florence, late 1200s, early 1300s, when Florence was just exploding with money, trade, banking.
And drama.
Oh, so much political drama.
More drama than you could shake a stick at.
Guelphs versus Ghibellines, and then just for kicks, the Guelphs decide to break up into their own little teams.
Right, exactly. And what makes this so fascinating is we have so many sources to pull from for this. We're not just stuck with the poetry. We've got biographies, historical accounts, even court records.
Wow.
So we can really get a feel for Dante as a person, not just this literary giant.
Okay, so let's get everyone on the same page. We're in Florence, imagine money everywhere, but like on top of that, just boiling over with these political factions. Guelphs, Ghibellines, the main event, but then the Guelphs are like, hold on, we're going to have our own little showdown too.
And it's not just ideas, right?
Mhm.
This is people's lives, their families, connections, everything on the line. Exile, power.
Okay, so Dante himself, before the fame, before the exile, we actually know what he looked like because his nephew was said to be like a carbon copy.
Oh, really?
And from those descriptions, not a looker,
Oh, no.
like slightly hunchback, long face, big jaw.
Not exactly a heartthrob.
Not by today's standards, at least.
Well, back then it was more about your family, your skills, how you could play the game.
And speaking of family, his wasn't hurting for money at all. They were in the money lending business. Very lucrative at the time.
They're very, very lucrative.
He could have just, coasted.
Easy life, yeah.
But he was drawn to intellectual pursuits, which tells you something, right?
It does. It means that basic survival wasn't really a concern. He had that freedom.
Yeah, he had that privilege.
Exactly, to follow his passions.
So he dives headfirst into Florentine politics, not just like attending meetings. We're talking holding actual positions, influencing policy.
And not just any position, some pretty significant ones.
Yeah, shows you the kind of respect he had, even though his family wasn't like old money.
The old guard, yeah.
Okay, so to get this whole political scene, we got to do the Guelph Ghibelline thing.
Right.
I know some people haven't cracked open their Italian history textbook lately. Give us the, Spark Notes version.
Super simplified. Guelphs were teen pope, all about supporting the papacy.
Okay.
Ghibellines were more for the Holy Roman Emperor.
Okay.
But it wasn't just about whose side you're on.
Right.
This was personal, family feuds, grudges going way, way back.
Okay, and then Dante's family history throws a wrench in this whole thing, right?
Oh, yeah, big time.
Because the Alighieri's, they were exiled when the Ghibellines were in charge.
Right.
But get this, Dante himself was born during that exile.
Wow.
In Florence.
So the Guelph poet, the guy who's like Mr. Pro-Pope.
Was born when his supposed enemies were running the show.
It's wild, isn't it? Makes you wonder how deeply Guelph they really were.
Hey, if they're living comfortably in Florence under Ghibelline rule.
Maybe they weren't playing for just one team.
Maybe they were hedging their bets.
Or maybe these labels weren't so clear-cut back then.
Right. It's a good reminder that personal connections could trump ideology any day.
Oh, yeah, especially in that world.
And that complexity is going to be important as we go on.
Very important.
Okay, so the Guelphs, they eventually win, but then, of course, there's got to be more drama.
Of course.
Enter the Black Guelphs, the White Guelphs.
Yep.
Break it down for us.
All right, so Black Guelphs, they're the establishment, families like the Donati.
Old money, old power.
That's right. And the White Guelphs, Dante's crew, they're aligned with the newer money banking families like the Cerci.
Up-and-comers.
Yeah, maybe not as politically savvy.
Interesting. So Dante, coming from his family background, he sides with the whites. Was that like a strategic move because of those financial ties?
Maybe. Or maybe he saw them as like the reformers.
Underdogs.
Yeah, hard to say for sure.
But that decision, siding with the whites?
Big consequences.
Oh, yeah. We'll see. So Dante, he's climbing the ladder in Florence, which at this point is basically a powder keg.
About to blow.
And of course, he reaches a top spot. He becomes a prior.
One of the top magistrates.
During the most chaotic time in Florentine history.
Talk about bad timing.
I know, right? So there's an attempted assassination of a cardinal who was sent to try to mediate between these factions.
Yeah.
Street brawls constantly, rumors of coup.
Yeah,
It's a mess.
pressure cooker city
And Dante and the other priors, they got to make these decisions.
with huge consequences.
Life or death, basically.
Yeah, no pressure.
So they try to look impartial. They exile leaders from both sides,
Both sides.
including Dante's own friend, Guido Cavalcanti.
Oh, wow.
Talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place. But ultimately, their actions kind of favored the whites,
Yeah.
whether they meant to or not.
And that's going to come back to bite Dante.
Big time. And as if things weren't complicated enough, he gets sent as an ambassador to Pope Boniface VIII.
Oh, boy.
Talk about walking into the lion's den.
Straight in.
So he's off in Rome playing diplomat. Meanwhile, back in Florence, everything goes haywire.
Oh.
Black Guelphs, with the Pope's backing, they seize control. And Dante, well, he's put on trial in absentia for corruption.
Corruption, huh? Now, it's worth noting that these charges were likely politically motivated.
Okay.
Was he, like, personally stuffing his pockets? Probably not.
Okay.
But this was a system built on favors, blurred lines.
Right.
So more likely guilty of playing the game.
Guilty by association.
Maybe.
But the verdict is exile.
Wow.
He's out, forced to flee Florence.
Everything he knows.
And that's when things take a turn that changes everything. So, Dante, exiled, kicked out of the city he loved, served, devoted himself to.
It's a turning point, isn't it?
Huge blood.
I mean, this is the guy who spent his whole life a Guelph,
Right.
even if his family history is a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
And now he's basically forced to rely on, to work with the people he opposed.
The Ghibellines?
Yeah.
He didn't join forces with them, did he?
He did.
No way.
Yeah, and not just some casual team up.
Oh, wow.
We're talking families like the Bubati,
Right.
their patriarch, Farinata, this legendary Ghibelline figure. Can you imagine the conversations, the grudging respect, maybe even the shared bitterness of exile?
That's wild, Dante the Guelph, finding common ground with his enemies.
It's quite a turn.
But did he actually, fight alongside them?
Yes.
Really? Against Florence?
There's a document from 1302, less than a year after his exile, puts him on a council with Farinata's son, no less, planning military action against Florence.
So we're not talking about Dante the poet just brooding and writing.
Right.
This is Dante the warrior, the strategist.
It's a side of him we don't often think about.
Right.
And it really challenges that image we have from the comedy.
Yeah.
And he's not just, attending these work councils. He's actually writing on behalf of the exiles, too.
Really?
There's this letter, Fire and Brimstone, justifying their civil war as a fight for liberty.
It does make you think, how much did exile change him fundamentally?
That's the question.
Did it make him re-examine his beliefs, or was it more about survival at that point?
Right. Like when you're stripped of everything.
Home, status, sense of belonging.
Yeah. Your ideology might become a little more flexible.
It's like that saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Exactly. But like on a whole other level.
Right.
But this alliance, this uneasy alliance, it didn't last. There was this brief moment, glimmer of hope, looked like the Ghibelline exiles might be welcomed back to Florence. Falls apart, and Dante's back to square one.
From exile to war, the glimmer of hope.
Yep.
And then back to square one. How'd he deal with that?
So he becomes, I think, increasingly disillusioned with the whole thing.
Okay.
He breaks from the other exiles, but more sympathetic to the White Guelphs.
Dante's original faction.
Exactly. So not exactly a warm welcome.
Right.
But safer than staying out with the Ghibellines.
So he's there licking his wounds, trying to figure out his next move.
And that's when we see a shift in his tone.
Oh, okay.
Remember that fiery letter justifying the war?
Yeah.
Now he's writing letters to Florence, but these are different.
Oh.
Begging for forgiveness, expressing remorse.
Wow.
There's even one titled, Popole mi quid fici tibi.
Which means...
My people, what have I done to you?
It's quite a contrast.
From rebel leader to penitent exile.
It really makes you wonder what caused that change. Was it the harsh realities of exile? Or was it a deeper internal thing?
Maybe a spiritual reckoning.
And it's not just the letter. Writing from this time, it reflects this new tone, too. And the comedy, his most famous work, he's starting on it around now, right? This new perspective doesn't make its way in.
Absolutely. Think of that scene in Inferno with Farinata.
Okay.
Written during this period, full of tension. But Dante presents himself very much as a Guelph. Even a little judgmental of Farinata's Ghibelline beliefs.
It's like he's trying to rewrite his own past, distance himself from that time with the Ghibellines.
Maybe even convince himself he was always a true Guelph at heart.
Really powerful example of how how life shapes art.
Absolutely.
And then there's that song from this period, Tre donne intorno al cor mi son venute. Tell us about Dante at this point.
It's complex, multi-layered, but you get this sense of regret, almost pleading for mercy from the Black Elves, acknowledging their victory, his defeat.
Wow.
There's a line where he says, "If guilt dies when a man repents, I should have been pardoned many months ago."
Heartbreaking.
Isn't it? He's not denying what he did, but he's hoping that change of heart, that repentance, will earn him a way back.
So wild to think that this whole mess, the exile, the regret, that's when Dante starts working on the comedy.
Yeah, it's almost like he's pouring all that turmoil, all that questioning, right into the writing.
Exactly. So it's not just these abstract ideas, theology. It's about real stuff, betrayal, loss, redemption.
Huge questions, justice, morality, good versus evil. But he's been through it, you know?
Yeah, he's seen it firsthand.
He's not just talking about it.
Right, right. It makes you think how our own experiences shape how we see the world.
Right.
Like, if Dante hadn't gone through all that, the political stuff, being forced to really examine his beliefs.
Would we even have the comedy?
I mean, would it be the same?
Hard to say.
Would he have explored those themes, heaven, hell, purgatory, with the same kind of depth?
It makes you wonder.
If he hadn't lived through his own personal hell, so to speak.
Right here on Earth.
Exactly.
It's like art imitates life, but with Dante,
it's even more than that.
it feels deeper.
He's taking those raw experiences.
And making them universal, something
Right.
we can still connect with all these centuries later.
And here's the ultimate irony.
What's that?
He never actually got that pardon. Died in exile in Ravenna, 1321.
It's almost like the comedy itself.
Became his way back to Florence.
Yeah.
Achieved a kind of immortality in the city that rejected him. Bittersweet, for sure.
Yeah, to a remarkable life.
Never went home physically.
But his words, his poetry, they made it back.
They've resonated through history, made him one of the most celebrated figures in Western literature.
And it all came from that upheaval, the exile, the politics.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think what we're left with is this, Dante's story. It's not just about Guelphs and Ghibellines, popes and emperors.
It's bigger than that.
It's about what it means to be human.
The choices we make,
When we're backed into a corner,
the power of art to outlive us all.
to speak to our deepest fears, our hopes, things that haven't changed.
And maybe it leaves us with one last question.
Oh.
What if Dante had gotten that pardon? Gone back to Florence, back to politics?
Did we even know his name?
Would we have been robbed of this masterpiece?
It's something to think about as we keep exploring this complex man.
And his legacy.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
We'll catch you next time.
See you then.